All right, let's bring in now former Speaker of the House, Bronwyn Bishop, and Liberal Senator Hollie Hughes. Welcome to you both. Bronwyn, I want to start with the trades and then we'll get to Trump's threat and the hostages. But clearly, the Prime Minister is under immense pressure to achieve an exemption from Donald Trump. He has already signed that executive order today, so it's not looking promising.
Look, Albanese is literally a boy on a man's errand. And he's so out of his depth it just doesn't matter. I mean, the fact of the matter is that the whole background of his personal background and that of Kevin Rudd puts them behind to start with. But to come out afterwards and imply, oh, we had such a nice chat and we've done a deal, is just so stupid when it's not true. So he's made the situation worse with that statement than it would have been otherwise. He doesn't even know how to finesse. He's got no idea. It's an embarrassment to see this man as Prime Minister of our nation on the international stage. So it's a long way to go before we find out whether or not there will be any exemptions given for us. And the first thing that the government could do is bring in some relief with regard to energy policy so that the people who are making the aluminium, for instance, can have a lessening in cost so that they can be cost competitive with a tariff. Let's start to think things that are within his control, not making up what somebody else is going to do.
Hollie, the reality is if there are tariffs on the aluminium and steel industry, many people will be thinking, well, you know, perhaps if Albanese, Penny Wong and Kevin Rudd hadn't been so hostile in past comments towards President Trump, there might have been a different outcome.
Well, but it's also come out this afternoon, Sharri, that President Trump has claimed that Australia had broken its verbal promise when it came to aluminium into the United States. And for anyone, I think, who doesn't just blindly believe what Mr Albanese said, that basically a deal was done, it's certainly a worrying sign that President Trump is reconsidering or was perhaps not as seriously considering exempting Australia from these tariffs. I do think it's important that, you know, we can be partisan and we're coming into an election and there'll be plenty of that. But the reality is when it comes to these sorts of issues, we do need to have a little bit of Team Australia to make sure that our manufacturers are being supported. As Peter Dutton has said, not only is the US an important trading partner, they're an important ally. We've had a very long-standing relationship with them, but that we also support free trade and want to ensure that we're supporting local manufacturers. It was an interesting suggestion there, Bronwyn. You know, the aluminium smelter in Tomago requires such huge amounts of energy, and quite often they're called upon to sort of slow down production or to come offline for a little bit, because obviously they can't go offline permanently because you can't restart them, but to shed the power so that Sydney can keep the lights on. So I think you're right, Bronwyn, if we are going to do anything when it comes to particularly the aluminium smelters, that we do have a look at some energy relief for them in a bid to keep them afloat until these matters are resolved.
I think you can't escape the fact that both Malcolm Turnbull and Scott Morrison were able to achieve these exemptions. So if Albanese can't, there'll be a lot of questions for him to answer about why that's the case. All right, a former Labor politician has weighed in on the latest damning poll figures. We spoke about those figures on the show last night. They show that the Albanese government is hemorrhaging voters in outer suburban areas. The former Fowler MP, Chris Hayes, told the Daily Telegraph that if those stats hold, it'd be a serious worry for the Labor Party at the next election, Bronwyn. I mean, in large part, Labor did win the last election because they were able to win some of those outer suburban seats. They need those seats to hold power. But those seats are where regular mainstream Australians are, and they're not buying the Albanese government's agenda.
Look, Chris Hayes was a thoroughly decent, old-fashioned Labor member who looked after his electors. I used to deal with him quite often, and I found that he was the sort of person you could have a good regard for. And when what he's describing is his own disillusionment with what has happened in that part of Sydney. Now, when I was party president back in 1985, I set my office up in Parramatta because I knew we had to go into the west of Sydney where aspirations were alive and well, because that's where future leaders were going to come from. When I became a senator, I put my office in Parramatta and served there. I regarded the 1 million people then that were surrounding me as my personal electorate, and I treated it like it was an electorate.
It's a good temperature check in that electorate for
Well,
just regular issues.
Yes, and the important thing was for Nick Greiner to get the landslide he got, he had to win seats in Western Sydney, and we did. So this has been a long-term process, but there is a realisation now, I think, by more and more Australians who may have had a soft spot for the old Labor Party, that they have well and truly abandoned them, and that the way ahead is through the Liberal Party, which believes in the individual, their opportunity to use their own talents and to get ahead without the burden of government crushing them, or regular red and green tape. They're the sorts of things that they respond to because they want for their kids, they want for their standard of living. These are good Australians and they deserve much better. And Peter Dutton is offering that to them.
Hollie, if Peter Dutton is able to find the path to victory at the next election, it will be through outer suburban seats, but also through Victoria, which has been such a difficult state for the coalition in the past.
Oh, absolutely. And I think what we saw in Victoria on the weekend, such an enormous shift away from the Labor Party. I haven't heard very many people, if any, mention that the seat in Werribee was actually the former Treasurer's seat. It was considered as safe as houses, that seat. And the fact that it's come down to a couple of hundred votes is an enormous swing away from the Labor Party in their heartland. The red brick wall is very, very quickly crumbling around Victoria. That is in part to the terrible Andrews-Allen government and what they have done in just decimating Victoria. It's absolutely devastating when you look at what this government has done to that state. But voters across the board, I think they're generally feeling a little bit gaslit by this Prime Minister and listening to the Labor members, because when you listen to their talking points that they sprout, and I hear them when they come on Sky News, we've done cheaper childcare, we've done free TAFE, and, you know, this renewable energy that's going to be so cheap and free for everybody, and all this ridiculous rubbish they're going on with. But everyday Australians know when they go to the grocery store, it costs more. When they try to pay their rent or their mortgage, it costs more. Their energy costs more.
100%.
When people are putting their kids into childcare and they're being told we've delivered cheaper childcare, but they're paying more every week to put their kids in childcare, it's gaslighting by the government of the Australian electorate.
You are
and I think they're
spot on.
starting to see through it.